Before you fall asleep tonight, there is something you need to realize about the silence you've been living in. It was never empty. For weeks now, maybe even months, you've been carrying this strange feeling that something in your life is shifting, but you can't explain it to anyone without sounding crazy. You wake up tired even after 8 hours of sleep. You sit in rooms full of people and still feel alone. You scroll through your phone late at night hoping something will distract your mind, but every distraction fades after a few seconds and the heaviness always comes back. And the hardest part is that nobody around you seems to notice how exhausted you really are. They see you going to work, paying bills, smiling when you need to, answering texts with one-word replies so nobody asks questions. But deep down, you feel disconnected from your own life. Like some part of you quietly checked out a long time ago and never fully returned. There have been moments recently that felt too strange to ignore. A song playing at exactly the right moment. A memory returning out of nowhere while sitting at a red light. Waking up at 3:11 in the morning with your chest tight and your mind racing even though the room was completely still. You tried telling yourself it was stress, burnout, maybe anxiety, but the feeling stayed. And what scares you most is not the silence around you. It's the silence inside you. Because there was a time when you used to believe things would eventually get better. You used to feel hopeful when a new month started. You used to think the pain had an expiration date. But lately, it feels like life has been holding you in one place while everyone else keeps moving forward. You watch people fall in love, get promoted, move away, build families, heal, grow, while you sit there wondering why everything in your life feels delayed. And even though you rarely admit it out loud, there have been nights where you questioned if anyone truly sees what you've been carrying. Not the polished version of you, the real version. The tired version sitting alone in the kitchen with only the refrigerator light glowing across the floor at 1:24 in the morning. The version of you replaying old conversations and wondering if you ruined something that could have changed your entire future. The version of you that almost gave up emotionally but kept going anyway because something deep inside refused to fully let go. And maybe that's why you're here right now. Maybe the reason this message found you is because a part of you still believes there has to be more to this silence than disappointment. Because what if the delay was never punishment? What if something unseen has been quietly keeping certain doors closed while you beg for them to open? And what if the answer you've been waiting for has been closer than you realized this entire time? A few nights ago, you almost reached out to someone you promised yourself you would never need again. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioner and the sound of rain tapping softly against the window. You sat on the edge of your bed holding your phone in both hands, staring at an old conversation that should have meant nothing by now, yet somehow still carried weight inside your chest. You told yourself you only wanted closure. Just one honest conversation. Just one sign that everything you gave was not wasted. But the strange thing is, every time you tried to type the message, something inside you hesitated. Your fingers stopped moving. Your breathing changed. Even the room itself felt different somehow, heavier and quieter at the same time. Eventually, you locked your phone and placed it face down beside you, frustrated with yourself for still caring after all this time. But what you did not realize in that moment was that not every closed door is rejection. Sometimes a door stays closed because you are emotionally attached to a version of your life that would have destroyed your peace if it reopened. That is the part nobody talks about. People tell you to keep pushing, keep chasing, keep forcing things to happen, but they never tell you how exhausting it becomes when your soul knows something your mind is still refusing to accept. And lately, your soul has been trying to get your attention in ways you cannot explain logically. You feel it while driving home after work, with the radio low and the highway lights blurring together in front of you. You feel it during random moments in grocery store aisles when a sudden sadness hits you for no clear reason. You feel it when everyone around you is laughing and somehow you still feel emotionally somewhere else. It is like part of you is standing between two different lives and you do not know which one you are supposed to walk toward anymore. There was a time when you thought answers would arrive clearly and quickly. You believed life would eventually make sense if you worked hard enough, prayed hard enough, stayed patient long enough. But now you are beginning to understand something difficult. Some seasons are intentionally unclear. Some answers arrive slowly because the person you are becoming would not survive receiving them too early. Think about how many times you begged for something that later fell apart anyway. Think about the people you cried over who are now strangers. Think about the plans you were devastated to lose that eventually revealed problems you could not see back then. At the time, it felt cruel. It felt personal. But now, deep down, you are starting to suspect that certain disappointments may have quietly protected you from becoming trapped inside the wrong future. And maybe that is why the silence around you feels different lately. Not empty, not punishing, just unfinished. Like something unseen has been carefully rearranging pieces in your life while you mistook the waiting for abandonment. Because there is still a reason you cannot fully let go. There is still a reason your heart keeps waking up before dawn with the strange feeling that something important is getting closer, even if you cannot see it yet. There is a reason certain memories keep returning when you least expect them. Not the dramatic ones. Not the obvious heartbreaks everyone could see. The quiet moments. The small conversations you thought you forgot. The night you sat in your car outside your apartment for nearly 40 minutes because you did not have the energy to walk inside and pretend to be okay again. The afternoon you stared at your reflection in the bathroom mirror at work and barely recognized the tired person looking back at you. The moment you almost told someone how much you were struggling but stopped yourself because you were afraid they would not understand. Those moments stayed with you because some part of your spirit was trying to tell you that you have been surviving for too long without truly feeling alive. And maybe that is why everything around you has started slowing down recently. Plans delayed, conversations fading, opportunities that once seemed certain suddenly becoming unclear. At first you thought life was falling apart. You blamed yourself for every closed door and every awkward silence. You replayed old mistakes in your head while lying awake at night wondering if you had ruined your own future somehow. But what if your life is not collapsing? What if it is separating? What if something deeper has been pulling you away from places and people that no longer match who you are becoming? That possibility scares you because it means the loneliness you feel right now might not be temporary confusion. It might be transition. And transitions are uncomfortable because they force you to release versions of yourself that once felt safe. You can already feel it happening. Certain conversations drain you now. Certain environments feel heavier than they used to. You laugh less around people who once made you feel accepted because somewhere deep inside you know you have outgrown pretending to be fine. Even your routines feel different. You still wake up, go to work, answer messages, run errands, pay bills, but beneath all of it, there is this strange emotional distance growing between you and the life you used to settle for. A few days ago, you noticed something small that would have seemed meaningless before. You were standing in line at a coffee shop just after sunrise, barely awake, when an older man near the window smiled at you for no reason and said, "You look like somebody carrying too much alone." It caught you off guard because he said it so gently, like he somehow recognized something you had spent months trying to hide from everyone else. Before you could even respond, he nodded once, picked up his coffee, and walked out into the cold morning air. You stood there frozen for a moment because the words stayed with you long after he disappeared. And ever since then, you have not been able to shake the feeling that life has been trying to reach you through small moments like that. Through random conversations, through strange timing, through nights of restlessness that force you to confront what you normally avoid during the day. Because despite how disconnected you have felt lately, there is still something inside you refusing to completely give up. Something quiet but persistent. Something that keeps telling you this season is not ending in the way you fear it will, even if you cannot understand it yet. The hardest part about emotional exhaustion is that it does not arrive all at once. It happens slowly, quietly, over months and years until one day you realize you no longer react to life the way you used to. Things that once excited you barely move you now. Conversations feel forced. Even good news feels distant, like it belongs to someone else. And lately you have been noticing that change inside yourself more than ever. You tell yourself you are just tired, just busy, just going through a rough season. But deep down you know it is something heavier than that. There are moments when you feel like your entire life has been on pause while everyone around you keeps moving forward. You sit at stoplights staring at strangers crossing the street and wonder how many of them are secretly carrying the same loneliness you are. You walk through stores hearing music overhead while your mind drifts somewhere else completely. And every night when the world finally gets quiet, the thoughts return stronger than before. Thoughts about the things you lost. The people who slowly disappeared without explanation. The opportunities that almost happened but somehow slipped away at the last second. What hurts most is not even the loss itself anymore. It is the confusion, the not knowing why certain doors kept closing no matter how hard you try to keep them open. Last Sunday evening, you found yourself driving with no destination, just trying to clear your mind before going back home. The sky was turning dark blue and the city lights reflected across the wet pavement from an earlier storm. You stopped near a small diner off the highway and sat in the parking lot watching people through the window. Families laughing over dinner, friends talking over coffee, a couple sitting silently together without needing to fill the space between them. And suddenly you felt this overwhelming ache in your chest because you realized how long it had been since you truly felt connected to anyone. Not surface conversations, not polite smiles, real connection. The kind where someone sees past the version of you that keeps saying, "I am fine," and notices the exhaustion underneath it. You stayed there for nearly 20 minutes before finally walking inside. The waitress who greeted you looked tired too, but she smiled warmly and said, "Long day." Something about the way she asked made your chest tighten because it sounded less like small talk and more like recognition. You nodded quietly and sat alone in a booth near the back window while rain started falling again outside. And as strange as it sounds, sitting there in that small diner with soft music playing overhead and strangers talking around you, you suddenly felt less abandoned than you had in weeks. Not because your problems disappeared, not because life suddenly made sense, but because for the first time in a long time, you felt this quiet feeling that maybe you are not being ignored by life after all. Maybe you are simply being slowed down long enough to notice what truly matters before moving into the next chapter of your life. Because the truth is, if everything you wanted had happened exactly when you demanded it, you would have carried the same wounded version of yourself into every blessing you prayed for. And somewhere deep down, you are beginning to realize that the waiting may have been changing you more than the answer ever could. There are certain nights that change you quietly, not because something dramatic happens, but because you finally become too emotionally tired to keep lying to yourself. A few evenings after that diner stop, you came home later than usual and left every light in the apartment off, except the small lamp near the kitchen sink. The room felt strangely peaceful in the dark. No television playing, no music, just the soft sound of traffic moving somewhere far outside your window. You dropped your keys onto the counter, loosened your jacket, and stood there for a long moment staring into nothing. Normally, you would have reached for your phone immediately to distract yourself from the silence, but this time you did not. Maybe because deep down you were starting to realize that distraction had become your way of avoiding what your heart had been trying to tell you for months. You have been grieving a version of your life that no longer exists. Not just relationships or missed opportunities, but old expectations. The person you thought you would become by now. The future you imagined years ago when you still believed hard work guaranteed clarity and patience guaranteed reward. But life did not unfold the way you expected. Some people left without explanation. Some dreams slowly faded while you watched helplessly. And somewhere in the middle of trying to survive all of it, you became emotionally numb without even noticing. That realization hit you harder than you expected. Because numbness is dangerous in a quiet way. It convinces you that you are healing simply because you stopped reacting. But deep down, you know the difference between peace and emotional shutdown. Peace feels light. Numbness feels empty. And lately, emptiness has followed you everywhere. Earlier that same week, one of your coworkers invited everyone out after work for drinks and dinner downtown. You almost said no like usual, but something inside pushed you to go anyway. The restaurant was crowded and loud, full of laughter and conversations overlapping each other, but despite being surrounded by people, you still felt detached. You smiled when expected, joined small conversations, pretended to enjoy yourself. But halfway through the evening, you caught yourself staring through the restaurant window at people walking beneath the streetlights outside, and suddenly you felt this overwhelming urge to leave. Not because you disliked anyone there, because you were exhausted from pretending your spirit was not carrying something heavy all the time. So you stepped outside alone into the cold night air and stood on the sidewalk while traffic passed in front of you. And that was when something strange happened. For a brief moment, standing there beneath the city lights with your hands in your pockets and your breath visible in the cold, you felt an unexpected calm settle over you. Not excitement, not answers, just calm. The kind that arrives quietly after emotional chaos has exhausted itself. It lasted only a few seconds, but it felt real enough to stop you in place. And for the first time in a long time, you wondered if maybe your life is not broken beyond repair. Maybe this season has been stripping away everything that kept you disconnected from yourself. Maybe the loneliness, the delays, the closed doors, and even the silence have all been preparing you to finally hear something you were too distracted to notice before. Because sometimes what feels like abandonment is actually separation. Separation from noise. Separation from confusion. Separation from the version of you that kept chasing things never meant to stay. You are beginning to notice that the signs always appear when you are finally quiet enough to see them. Not loud dramatic signs like movies make people expect. Smaller things. Subtle things. The kind most people dismiss because they happen during ordinary moments. Yesterday morning, while getting ready for work, you reached into the pocket of an old jacket hanging near your front door and found a folded receipt from almost 2 years ago. At first it seemed meaningless, just faded paper from some random coffee shop outside town. But when you looked closer, you remembered exactly who you were the day you bought it. You remembered the version of yourself that still believed life would turn out differently by now. Back then you were hopeful in ways you no longer know how to explain. You carried plans in your chest instead of exhaustion. You trusted people more easily. You still believed delayed things eventually arrived. Standing there in your apartment, holding that old receipt between your fingers, you suddenly felt this ache in your stomach because it hit you how much has changed since then. And yet at the same time, something else became clear too. Despite everything you lost, despite all the nights you questioned yourself, some part of you is still here, still trying, still searching for meaning even after disappointment tried to convince you to stop. That realization stayed with you throughout the entire day. At work, you found yourself drifting into thought during meetings, barely hearing what people around you were saying. Your body was present, but internally, you kept replaying moments from the past few years like scattered scenes from a film. The unanswered prayers, the plans that collapsed unexpectedly, the relationships that slowly drained your spirit while you fought to keep them alive. And the strange thing is, for the first time, you were not remembering those moments with anger. You were remembering them with distance. Almost like your heart is finally starting to separate itself from things it once believed it could not survive without. Later that evening, you stopped at a gas station outside the city while driving home. The air smelled like rain again, and the parking lot was nearly empty except for a truck parked near the far curb. As you walked back to your car holding a cup of coffee in one hand, you noticed a little girl sitting inside the truck staring out the window at the sky. She looked peaceful, completely absorbed in watching the clouds move above the streetlights. Then suddenly she smiled and pointed upward while saying something to her father you could not hear through the glass. It lasted only a second, but something about that tiny moment stayed with you during the drive home. Maybe because it reminded you that people notice different things depending on the condition of their spirit. Some people only notice stress. Others notice beauty hidden inside ordinary moments. And lately, it feels like life has been slowly pulling your attention away from noise and back toward the quieter things you used to overlook. The feeling in your chest has changed too. It is still heavy sometimes, but no longer hopeless in the same way. Now it feels more like standing in the middle of a long hallway, just before a door finally opens. You still do not know where this season is leading. You still have nights where doubt creeps back in and whispers that nothing will ever change. But beneath the fear, another feeling has started growing stronger. A quiet sense that the delays in your life may not have been random at all. Because if every door had opened when you first demanded it, you would have walked into rooms carrying wounds you had not yet healed. What unsettles you the most lately is not the waiting itself. It is the feeling that something inside you has already changed before your circumstances ever did. A few months ago, you would have reacted differently to all of this. You would have forced conversations that no longer felt natural. You would have chased clarity from people who only gave confusion. You would have exhausted yourself trying to fix every silence because silence used to terrify you. But now, something quieter has taken its place. Not confidence exactly, more like awareness. The kind that grows slowly after disappointment strips away every illusion you once depended on. You are starting to notice how many times you ignored your own spirit just to avoid feeling alone. How many times you stayed connected to people who made you feel emotionally invisible simply because losing them seemed more frightening than losing yourself. That truth has been difficult to face, especially during the late hours when your apartment grows silent, and there is nothing left to distract you from your own thoughts. Last night you found yourself sitting on the living room floor with only the television glow lighting the room, though you were not really watching anything. Your phone buzzed beside you with another notification you did not care enough to open. The clock on the microwave read 12:43 a.m. Outside, headlights passed across your ceiling every few minutes from cars moving down the street below. And somewhere in the middle of that silence, you realized how long you have been emotionally surviving on empty. You kept telling yourself you were healing simply because you learned how to function again. But functioning is not the same as living. Smiling through exhaustion is not peace. Staying busy is not fulfillment. And deep down, your spirit has known that for a long time. That realization hit harder than you expected because it forced you to confront something painful. The life you have been trying to rebuild may not actually be the life you were meant to return to. Maybe that is why certain doors refuse to reopen no matter how desperately you knocked on them. Maybe that is why every time you tried to go backward emotionally, something inside you felt heavier afterward. Earlier today during lunch break, you walked farther than usual just to clear your head and ended up near a small park a few blocks from your office. The trees were mostly bare from the season changing, and cold wind moved quietly through the branches overhead. Near one of the benches, an older woman sat feeding birds while reading a worn paperback book in her lap. You almost walked past without noticing her, but then she looked up briefly and smiled in that calm, familiar way older people sometimes do when they sense someone carrying something invisible. For some reason, the sight stayed with you long after you left. Maybe because there was something peaceful about her presence. No rushing, no forcing, just stillness. And lately, stillness has started affecting you differently. It no longer feels like punishment every time life slows down. Sometimes it feels like protection, like space is being created around you so you can finally hear what anxiety and distraction kept drowning out for years. Because beneath all the confusion, there is a truth quietly forming inside you now. You are not the same person who entered this season. The waiting changed you. The loneliness changed you. The unanswered questions changed you. And maybe the reason you feel so emotionally caught between two versions of your life is because one of them is finally ending, even if the next one has not fully appeared yet. There comes a moment in certain seasons of life when the truth finally becomes impossible to ignore. Not because someone explains it to you directly, but because your spirit becomes too exhausted to keep misunderstanding what has been happening. And lately, that moment has been getting closer. You have spent so much time believing the delays in your life meant you were forgotten. You thought the silence meant you were being denied something everyone else seemed to receive so easily. But slowly, almost painfully, another possibility has started forming inside you. What if the things that did not work out were not punishments at all? What if they were interruptions? Protection disguised as disappointment. Think about how many times you begged life to give you something that eventually revealed itself to be wrong for you. The relationship you thought would save you emotionally, but instead slowly drained your peace. The opportunity you were devastated to lose that later collapsed for everyone involved. The places you desperately tried to belong where you constantly felt invisible no matter how much effort you gave. At the time, every closed door felt cruel, personal, unfair. But now, standing where you are emotionally, you can finally see pieces of the pattern more clearly. A few nights ago, you could not sleep again. So around 2 in the morning, you drove aimlessly through the city just to escape the heaviness inside your apartment. Most of the streets were nearly empty except for delivery trucks and the occasional headlights passing beneath traffic signals, changing colors for no one. Eventually, you parked near the Riverwalk downtown and sat quietly watching reflections ripple across the dark water. The air was cold enough to sting your hands, but you stayed there anyway because something about the silence felt strangely necessary. While sitting there, your mind drifted back to a conversation from nearly a year ago with someone you once thought you could not live without. Back then, you were willing to abandon your own peace just to keep them close. You ignored warning signs, ignored exhaustion, ignored how anxious and emotionally unstable you had become trying to hold everything together. And suddenly, sitting there beside the water in the middle of the night, a realization hit you so deeply it almost took your breath away. If that relationship had continued, you would have lost yourself, completely trying to save something never meant to survive. For the first time, you did not feel anger about it ending. You felt gratitude, quiet, painful gratitude, Because now you finally understood why certain things had to fall apart even when your heart begged for them to stay. That realization changed something inside you. Not instantly, not dramatically, but enough to make you question every delay in your life differently. Maybe the silence was not abandonment. Maybe it was redirection. Maybe every unanswered prayer was protecting you from becoming permanently attached to places your spirit would eventually outgrow. And if that is true, then the loneliness you have been carrying may not be evidence that your life is broken. It may be evidence that something old is ending before something healthier can finally begin. That thought scares you because healing means you can no longer return to the version of yourself that accepted emotional survival as enough. You are starting to want more than survival now. More than temporary comfort. More than chasing people and situations that only leave you emptier afterward. And somewhere deep inside, you can feel that your life is slowly preparing to shift in a direction you never would have chosen for yourself before this season changed you. What you still do not fully understand is that your healing was never only about you. That realization begins quietly, almost too quietly to notice at first. It shows up in the way certain conversations affect you now. In the way you suddenly feel protective over your peace after spending years giving pieces of yourself away to people who barely noticed the cost. And lately, there have been moments where you catch yourself imagining a future that used to feel impossible. Not a perfect future, just one where you finally feel emotionally safe inside your own life again. That thought alone feels unfamiliar because for so long you became used to surviving disappointment instead of expecting peace. But something inside you has started shifting. You noticed it earlier this week while standing in line at the grocery store after work. The woman in front of you had a little boy sitting inside the shopping cart, maybe 4 or 5 years old, wearing a winter hat too big for his head. While his mother searched through her purse looking for coupons, the little boy looked directly at you and smiled for no reason at all. It lasted maybe 2 seconds before he turned away again, but somehow it stayed with you during the entire drive home. Maybe because there was something innocent about it, something unguarded. And suddenly you found yourself thinking about how different your own life might have felt if someone had emotionally protected you better when you were younger. If someone had noticed your loneliness before it became part of your identity. That thought hit deeper than you expected because it made you realize something painful but important. The version of you emerging from this season is becoming the kind of person you once desperately needed yourself. More patient, more aware, more careful with the hearts of others because you understand what emotional neglect actually feels like. And maybe that is part of why this season has been so necessary. Not to punish you, to soften you in the right places without destroying your spirit completely. Because one day someone is going to need the healed version of you. Someone is going to cross paths with your life during one of their darkest moments and find comfort in the peace you fought so hard to build. You may not know who they are yet. Maybe it is someone you have not even met. Maybe it is a future relationship that will finally feel safe instead of exhausting. Maybe it is a child someday who learns emotional security because you chose to heal instead of passing your pain forward. Or maybe it is simply another tired person sitting across from you in some ordinary moment years from now, needing someone who understands what silent suffering feels like. The strange thing is, you can already feel your heart becoming more sensitive to people now. Not in a weak way, in a deeper way. You notice sadness hidden behind smiles more easily. You notice exhaustion in other people because you recognize it in yourself. And that awareness is changing how you move through the world. Last night, while sitting alone on your couch with rain tapping softly against the windows again, you realized something that almost brought tears to your eyes. The loneliness you have been carrying may not have been meaningless after all. It may have been teaching you how to become someone capable of offering genuine peace to others someday. Not fake positivity, not empty advice. Real understanding. The kind that only comes from surviving seasons that nearly convinced you to give up on yourself. And for the first time, the waiting no longer feels completely empty to you. It feels connected to something larger than your immediate pain. Like every delayed answer has been slowly shaping a version of you strong enough to carry what comes next without losing yourself in the process. For so long, you believed the biggest question in your life was whether things would finally change for you. Whether the right opportunity would appear, whether the loneliness would eventually end, whether the silence would finally break. But lately, another question has started forming underneath all the others, and it is far more uncomfortable to face. What if life has already been trying to move you towards something new, but part of you has still been emotionally clinging to what no longer belongs in your future? That realization began settling into you slowly over the past few days. You noticed it while cleaning your apartment Sunday afternoon. Music played softly from your phone while pale winter light stretched across the living room floor. And for some reason you found yourself opening drawers and closets you had ignored for months. Old receipts, photos, notes, little pieces of your past hidden away in places you stopped checking long ago. At first it felt ordinary, but then you came across an old sweatshirt you used to wear constantly during one of the hardest seasons of your life. The moment you touched it, memories rushed back all at once. The sleepless nights, the anxiety, the way you kept hoping certain people would finally love you in the way you needed. And suddenly you realized something painful. You do not miss those moments nearly as much as you miss the hope you carried during them. That distinction changed everything, because it forced you to admit that part of your sadness has not been about losing people or plans. It has been about grieving the future you thought those things would lead to. You sat there quietly on the floor holding that sweatshirt for several minutes while the room around you stayed completely still. And in that stillness, another truth became impossible to ignore. The version of you who once begged for certain doors to stay open would not recognize the strength quietly growing inside you now. Back then you were terrified of being alone, terrified of disappointing people, terrified that if things did not work out quickly, it meant you were somehow failing at life. But now, after everything this season has pulled you through, your definition of peace has started changing. Peace is no longer chasing approval. Peace is no longer forcing connections that leave your spirit drained afterward. Peace is becoming honest enough to stop returning to places that repeatedly break your heart. Later that evening you went for a walk just before sunset. The air was cold, and Christmas lights still hung from apartment balconies nearby, even though the holidays had already passed. As you walked through the neighborhood, you noticed how quiet everything felt compared to the noise that constantly lives inside your mind. And for the first time in a long while, you stopped asking why your life has been delayed. Instead, you found yourself wondering who you are becoming because of the delay. That question stayed with you during the entire walk home. Because deep down, you already know the answer is not simply about circumstances changing around you. It is about whether you are finally ready to stop building your life around fear, loneliness, and emotional survival. Somewhere inside you, a quieter version of yourself has been waiting patiently for you to arrive. A version no longer desperate to force outcomes. No longer willing to abandon inner peace just to avoid temporary discomfort. And maybe that is what this season has truly been asking from you all along. Not perfection, not certainty, just the courage to stop running back toward what your spirit has already outgrown. Something has been changing inside you so quietly that most people around you probably have not noticed it yet. On the outside, your life still looks mostly the same. You still wake up early for work. You still answer messages hours later pretending you forgot to reply. You still pass strangers in grocery store aisles and sit in traffic beneath the same tired streetlights every evening. But internally, something is no longer reacting the way it used to. Situations that once would have shattered your peace now simply make you tired. Conversations that once controlled your emotions no longer hold the same power over you. Even the loneliness feels different lately. Not easier exactly, but clearer somehow. Like your spirit has stopped panicking inside the silence and started listening to it instead. A few mornings ago you woke up before your alarm just before sunrise. The apartment was still dark except for a faint blue glow coming through the blinds. And for several minutes, you simply lay there staring at the ceiling in complete stillness. Normally your mind would already be racing by then, replaying worries about the future or regrets from the past. But this time something unusual happened. There was no panic, no heaviness pressing against your chest, just quiet, deep quiet, the kind that feels almost unfamiliar after spending so much of your life emotionally overstimulated. You stayed there listening to the distant sound of rain outside and realized how long it had been since your mind felt still without needing distraction to force it. That moment stayed with you all day, not because it solved your problems. Your life did not suddenly become perfect overnight. Bills still existed. Certain relationships still felt unresolved. Some answers were still missing. But something inside you had softened. And strangely enough, that softness felt stronger than all the emotional armor you spent years building to protect yourself. Later that afternoon, While driving home through slow traffic, you noticed a small church sitting quietly between two apartment buildings near an intersection you pass almost every day. You had seen it countless times before, without thinking about it, but for some reason your eyes stayed fixed on it longer than usual while waiting at the red light. Nothing dramatic happened. No sign appeared. No voice spoke. Yet something about the stillness of that little building in the middle of the noisy city affected you deeply. It reminded you that peace has never needed to announce itself loudly to be real. And suddenly you understood something important. The reason this season has felt so emotionally confusing is because your life has been shifting inwardly long before anything changed outwardly. The transformation started in places nobody else could see. In your thinking, in your boundaries, in your ability to sit alone without immediately trying to escape yourself, in your growing refusal to keep chasing things that leave your spirit empty afterward. That is why certain environments feel uncomfortable now. That is why some conversations exhaust you faster than before. You are becoming more aware of what costs you your peace. And once that awareness arrives, you cannot fully return to unconscious living again. Deep down, you already know that. You can feel it during the quiet moments now. While making coffee early in the morning. While watching rain move across your apartment windows at night. While sitting in your car after work before turning the key and driving home. Something inside you has stopped begging for immediate answers and started trusting that clarity will arrive when your spirit is finally ready to carry it without fear. You may not realize it yet, but the way you respond to your life has already started changing in small, quiet ways that matter more than dramatic breakthroughs ever could. A few months ago, mornings felt heavy before they even began. You would wake up already exhausted, already expecting disappointment before the day even unfolded. But recently there have been moments, brief moments, where you notice yourself breathing differently, slower, calmer, not because everything around you suddenly improved, but because something inside you is no longer collapsing every time uncertainty appears. That change is subtle, but it is real. Earlier this week, after another long shift at work, you stopped at the same grocery store you usually go to on your way home. Nothing unusual about it. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. Shopping carts rattled across the floor. People moved through aisles staring at lists on their phones, lost in their own worlds. Yet while standing near the produce section, you caught yourself watching an elderly couple quietly helping each other shop. The husband slowly reached for items while the wife read labels aloud because his eyesight seemed weak. They moved carefully, patiently, completely unhurried by the world around them. And something about the tenderness of that small, ordinary moment affected you more deeply than you expected. Not because it made you sad, because it reminded you that real peace rarely arrives in dramatic ways. Most of the time it arrives quietly, hidden inside ordinary moments people overlook while chasing bigger things. On the drive home afterward, you thought about how much of your life has been spent waiting for one massive moment to finally change everything. One answer, one breakthrough, one relationship, one opportunity. But maybe healing does not happen like that at all. Maybe it happens in smaller ways first. In the way your chest no longer tightens every time your phone stays silent. In the way you can finally sit alone without immediately feeling abandoned. In the way you are beginning to trust your own inner peace more than the temporary validation of people who never truly understood your heart. That realization stayed with you later that night, while sitting beside your apartment window, watching rain slide slowly down the glass again. The city outside looked blurred and distant beneath the streetlights. But for once your thoughts did not feel chaotic. They felt reflective, softer, and as strange as it sounds, you suddenly became aware of how far you have actually come emotionally. Even if your life still feels unfinished. There was a time when loneliness made you desperate. A time when silence convinced you that something was wrong with you. A time when delays sent you spiraling into fear that you were being forgotten while everyone else moved ahead. But now, even with unanswered questions still sitting in front of you, you are no longer reacting from panic in the same way. Something inside you has become steadier, more grounded, more willing to trust that not every closed door is failure. Some are protection, some are preparation, and some are simply teaching you how to stop searching for your worth in places that were never capable of holding it safely. That truth has been quietly rebuilding you piece by piece during this entire season, even on the nights you thought nothing was happening at all. And maybe that is the deeper meaning hidden underneath all of this waiting. Maybe the life ahead of you requires a version of you that could only be formed through silence, patience, loss, and learning how to remain soft without allowing the world to harden your spirit completely. Tonight the apartment feels different again. Not because your circumstances suddenly changed overnight, but because something inside you no longer feels at war with the silence the way it once did. The rain finally stopped a few hours ago, and through the window the city lights glow softly across the wet pavement below. Cars still move through the streets. People are still out there carrying invisible burdens of their own. Somewhere someone is sitting alone at a kitchen table questioning their future the same way you once did night after night. And maybe that is why this moment feels strangely sacred to you now. Not dramatic, not perfect, just honest. You sit quietly on the couch with a warm cup of coffee cooling slowly between your hands. And for the first time in a very long while, you are no longer desperately searching for immediate answers. You are simply present. That alone would have been impossible for the version of you who entered this season months ago. Back then silence felt unbearable. Every delayed response felt personal. Every closed door felt like proof that you were somehow behind in life, while everyone else moved forward. But now, after all the lonely drives at midnight, all the exhausted mornings, all the moments spent staring at ceilings wondering why your heart felt so heavy, something has become clear. You survived. Every season you thought would break you completely. Not perfectly, not gracefully every day, but you survived. And somewhere between the disappointment, the waiting, the emotional exhaustion, and the unanswered questions, your spirit quietly became stronger than you realized. Earlier this evening, you found yourself cleaning the kitchen while soft music played in the background, and suddenly you noticed something almost unbelievable. Your mind was calm. Not forced calm, real calm. No racing thoughts, no replaying old conversations, no overwhelming fear about the future, just stillness. The kind that arrives after a storm finally passes far enough into the distance that you can hear yourself think again. It only lasted a few minutes, but it was enough to remind you that healing does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives as the absence of chaos you once carried every single day. And maybe that is what this entire season has been trying to teach you. That peace is not found by forcing life to move faster. Peace comes when you stop measuring your worth by what has not happened yet. Because the truth is, some of the things you once cried over would have pulled you further away from yourself if they had stayed. Some delays protected you from futures that looked good on the surface, but would have slowly emptied your spirit over time. You understand that now in a way you could not before. The silence was never empty. The waiting was never meaningless. Even the loneliness carried lessons your future self will someday be grateful for. And although you still do not know exactly where life is leading next, something deep inside no longer feels abandoned. It feels guided in a quieter way. Softer, slower, more intentional. Like your spirit finally stopped fighting the process long enough to recognize that not everything delayed was denied. Some things simply needed time to become safe enough for your heart to receive them without losing itself again. So tonight, as the city grows quieter outside your window and another ordinary day comes to an end, you breathe differently than you used to. Not because every answer arrived, but because somewhere along the way, you finally stopped believing the silence meant you were alone.